If you think a 1990s Japanese car will automatically run for 500,000 miles, that belief can empty your bank account before you even get home. But if you understand why a few of those engines kept going when newer, cleverer cars gave up, you can make almost any engine last dramatically longer. Because there is a story every driver has heard. A battered old Toyota taxi, a Honda with faded paint and a mileage display that no longer shocks anyone. An engine that seems to start on the first turn of the key after 3 decades, while the car around it looks ready to retire. And then comes the conclusion. Japanese engineers in the 1990s knew a secret that everyone else forgot. Today we are going to test that conclusion properly, not repeat workshop folklore, not pretend that every Corolla, Civic, Primera or Lexus from the 1990s was indestructible, and not pretend that somebody has just uncovered a hidden formula which guarantees 500,000 miles. 500,000 miles is more than 800,000 kilometers. That is an exceptional life, not a promise printed on a timing belt cover. Plenty of old Japanese engines failed early, plenty of modern engines will outlive them. Rust, neglected coolant, skipped oil changes, and a bad repair can kill any badge on the bonnet. But there is a real lesson buried inside that legend. It is not one magic alloy, it is not simply they were built better. It is a chain of decisions, how much stress an engine was asked to carry, how easy it was to notice a small problem, how often it was serviced, and what happened when an owner heard the first warning instead of waiting for the breakdown. And the final reason matters most, because it changes the question a UK buyer should ask in 2026, not which old Japanese car is bulletproof. The better question is, has this engine kept enough of its safety margin to deserve my money? The myth starts with a very expensive mistake. Picture the advert. Japanese reliability, drives perfectly. High miles but nothing to worry about. The price is tempting because the odometer reads 170,000, 190,000, maybe 220,000 miles. You think the difficult part has already been survived. The engine has proved itself. Then, 2 months later, the temperature needle begins to creep in traffic. Not all the way into the red, just a little higher than normal. You tell yourself it is an old car being an old car. A week later, there is a sweet smell after a motorway run. Then the heater goes lukewarm. The repair bill is not large because the badge is Japanese. It is large because a small cooling system warning was allowed to become a heat event. That is the first truth. Reputation does not erase condition. The famous long-lived engines did not survive because they were invincible. They survived because, in the best examples, they were not constantly living at the edge of their capability. When the oil level was correct, the cooling system worked and faults were fixed early, they had room to absorb ordinary life. That word, room, is the beginning of the whole story. An engine has to deal with pressure, heat, friction, vibration, and contamination every time you use it. It also has to cope with school runs in freezing weather, long motorway trips, missed service appointments, weak batteries, poor fuel, traffic jams, and the owner who only checks the oil when a dashboard warning appears. No engine enjoys this. The question is how much punishment it can tolerate before normal wear turns into damage. Many admired Japanese petrol engines from the 1990s were naturally aspirated and were asked to deliver fairly modest power for their size. That does not make every one of them superior. It does mean that, compared with a smaller modern turbocharged engine producing a great deal from every litre, they often had a less aggressive daily job. Less aggressive is not the same as slow. It means the engine may have spent more of its working life away from its hottest, highest pressure limits. In practical terms, that can give the oil, pistons, bearings, rings and cooling system a little more breathing space, and this is where the old car legend becomes dangerous. People hear low-stressed engine and translate it as maintenance-free engine. It means the opposite. A reserve only helps if you do not waste it. Keep that thought because the next clue explains why some engines looked ordinary on paper but felt almost impossible to kill until one maintenance item was ignored. Clue 1. They were often designed for the boring miles. The most impressive thing about a long-life engine is rarely what it does in the first 5 minutes of a test drive. It is what it does on the 10,000th cold start, the 3,000th queue outside a school, the wet motorway trip at 70 miles per hour with the heater, lights and rear screen all working. Boring miles are where an engine earns its reputation. In the 1990s, many mainstream Japanese cars were built for owners who expected quiet, predictable transport, not a constant relationship with a specialist. The useful version of conservative engineering was simple: start, run smoothly, tolerate ordinary use, and be repairable. That does not mean engineers had a secret meeting and agreed to make cars last forever. It means that power, emissions, fuel economy, cost, packaging, and durability were balanced differently from today. A 1.8-litre engine that makes enough power without a turbocharger, variable geometry, a high-pressure fuel system, and several layers of thermal management simply has fewer highly loaded systems competing for space. Fewer systems does not automatically mean fewer failures. Old cars had distributors, ignition leads, tired vacuum hoses, leaking gaskets, and corroded connectors. But when something went wrong, the path from symptom to cause could be shorter. A rough idle might point to a hose, plugs, leads, or a service item. A coolant leak or oil seep could often be seen before it triggered a chain reaction. That is a massive distinction for a high-mileage car. Durability is not only about avoiding faults, it is about making faults visible early enough to stay cheap. Think of two engines with the same tiny coolant leak. In one car, the owner sees a damp hose joint during a service and replaces it. In the other, the leak sits behind covers and under trays, the coolant level is never checked, and the first visible symptom is overheating on the M25. Neither engine was betrayed by its country of origin. One problem was intercepted before it became structural. So when you look at an old Japanese engine, do not ask only whether it starts instantly. Ask whether its history shows boring care, regular oil changes, evidence of coolant work, timing belt invoices where relevant, and owners who wrote down the small jobs. The unglamorous paperwork is more valuable than a legendary engine code, but accessible maintenance only explains part of the mystery. The next clue is what happened inside the engine every time the oil got a little older, a little hotter, or a little lower than it should have been. Clue 2. The secret was not thick metal. You will often hear someone say old Japanese engines had stronger blocks or thicker metal. Sometimes a specific engine family may indeed have robust components, but using that sentence as a universal explanation is how myths replace diagnosis. The more useful idea is mechanical margin. Imagine a bridge designed for a certain load. If every lorry pushes it close to the maximum, tiny weaknesses matter quickly. If normal load stays well below the limit, the bridge has time on its side. Engines are similar. Bearings, rings, valve gear, head gaskets, and oil films live longer when repeated stresses remain manageable. Many 1990s Japanese engines earned their reputation in cars that were not chasing today's combination of downsized capacity, high torque at low revs, strict emissions control, and brochure-leading fuel consumption. Again, often, not always, but the overall recipe could be comparatively forgiving. That is why a naturally aspirated petrol engine with sensible servicing can feel so calm at 150,000 miles. It may not be making headline torque from a tiny displacement. It may not be asking a turbocharger and high-pressure fuel system to deliver their best performance from the moment you pull away. It may simply be doing a smaller job, repeatedly, without drama. Now, the part people miss: a high-mileage engine is not the one that has never worn. It has worn slowly and predictably enough that its owner could renew the items around it. Hoses, mounts, thermostats, alternators, starters, and water pumps all age. A 500,000-mile engine is usually surrounded by parts replaced before they could take it down. This is why "it has never needed anything" is not necessarily a compliment in an advert. On a 25 or 30-year-old car, it can mean deferred maintenance waiting for its next owner. The better sentence is, "it has been maintained, and here are the invoices." There is another uncomfortable implication. The old Japanese car with the highest asking price is not always the safest buy. The bargain with a complete service file, a dry cooling system, and a sensible owner may be a better bet than the shiny example that has been parked for long periods and has no evidence of what was done underneath. We are getting closer to the truth, but we still have not touched the system that quietly decides whether an engine survives: lubrication. And this is the clue that separates a high-mileage hero from a car that sounds fine right up until it does not. Clue 3. Oil was not a service item. Every combustion engine tells the truth through its oil. The oil carries heat away from loaded parts. It keeps moving surfaces separated by a microscopic film. It carries contaminants towards the filter. It has to work when the engine is cold, when it is boiling hot, when you have driven 2 miles to the shops, and when you have sat in traffic for 40 minutes. When people describe an old Toyota or Honda engine as unbreakable, what they often remember is an engine that was given clean oil at sensible intervals for years. The badge receives the praise. The routine did much of the work. In a 1990s engine, an owner or independent garage could often make the condition of the lubrication system part of normal life. Check the dipstick, notice a falling level, look for a leak, change the filter with the oil, investigate a new rattle rather than turning the radio up. These habits are not glamorous, but they protect the parts that cannot be cheaply protected later. This does not mean every old engine could run on any oil. The right viscosity and specifications still matter. The answer is the correct oil, at the right interval for the engine and its use, with a proper filter and a genuine check of the level between services. Here is the moment that catches many UK drivers. Mileage is not the only thing that ages oil. Short journeys, repeated cold starts, infrequent use and time all matter. A car doing 3,000 miles a year on 5-minute runs can be harder on its oil than a car doing 12,000 motorway miles with regular warm-up. So if you are buying a 1990s Japanese car, an unusually low mileage figure should not hypnotize you. Ask how it reached that number. Was it garaged and maintained? Or did it sit for long stretches, accumulating moisture, old fuel, tired seals, and neglected fluids? Low miles can be excellent. Low miles without evidence can be a question mark, and there is a test you can apply without pretending to be an engine builder. Before a purchase, look for consistency. Does the oil service history line up with the MOT mileage record? Do the invoices describe filters, plugs, coolant, and belts, as well as oil? Does the seller know the oil used, or do they only know that it was serviced somewhere? A complete answer is not a guarantee. An evasive answer is information too. Still, clean oil alone cannot explain why many owners remember old engines as easier to live with. The next clue is about heat, the silent force that turns an affordable fault into an engine-ending one. Clue 4. They did not win by running hotter. Most engines do not die suddenly from old age. They die because a small weakness is allowed to create an extreme moment. A thermostat sticks. A radiator begins to block. A hose softens from the inside. The water pump leaks through a small weep hole. The cooling fan does not come in. The coolant level falls little by little. Then comes one summer traffic jam, one loaded motorway climb, one owner who notices the gauge late. That is the day an engine can lose its future. The reason a lot of old Japanese engines gained a reputation for surviving huge mileages is not that they were immune to overheating. They were often maintained by people who understood that the cooling system was part of the engine, not an accessory. The radiator, cap, hoses, thermostat, fan and coolant must all be treated as one chain. This is especially important in the UK, where an old car may have faced decades of wet weather, salt and repairs of varying quality. A mechanically healthy engine can still be attached to a tired radiator, corroded pipes or the wrong coolant mixture. The engine code cannot protect it from that. Here is a practical rule. Never dismiss a temperature issue because the car is old. An engine that normally sits at a steady temperature and suddenly changes its behavior is giving you information. A heater that goes cold, a sweet smell, coolant stains, a fan that never runs, a gauge that climbs only in traffic. These are reasons to investigate, not reasons to negotiate a few £100s off the price and hope. The most expensive phrase in used car ownership is, "It only did it once." The 1990s cars that reached extraordinary mileages were rarely the cars that never needed attention. They were the cars whose owners stopped the story at the first chapter. A leaking hose was a hose. A noisy bearing was a bearing. A timing belt service was carried out before the belt became a headline. That brings us to a complication. If old Japanese engines were so durable because they were simpler, why do some modern engines with advanced fuel systems, precise electronics, and better machining cause owners more anxiety? The answer is not that progress failed, it is that progress moved the pressure to different places. Clue 5. Modern engines did not get weaker. Modern engines have to do an extraordinary number of things at once. They have to produce useful torque from small capacities, use less fuel, meet emissions rules, warm up quickly, protect catalysts, communicate with sensors, and deliver a clean drive in traffic. They can be genuinely remarkable. But every extra demand changes the environment in which the engine lives. Consider fuel injection. Many older petrol engines used port fuel injection. Fuel was introduced upstream of the intake valve. Modern direct injection petrol engines inject fuel straight into the combustion chamber. Direct injection has real advantages, but the fuel no longer passes over the back of the intake valves in the same way. Technical literature identifies intake valve deposits as a known issue in GDI engines, precisely because that fuel washing effect is absent. This is not a reason to panic about every modern petrol car. It is a reason to understand what maintenance can and cannot do. A bottle poured into the fuel tank may help where fuel reaches, but it cannot promise to clean a surface that the fuel does not touch. If an engine has a known deposit concern, the right response is a proper diagnosis, suitable driving and maintenance habits, and an informed conversation with a specialist, not faith in a miracle bottle. The older engine did not have this particular problem in the same form. Its fuel system was usually less complex and, in many cases, less highly pressurized. But it had its own age-related faults. Injectors can clog, seals harden, sensors fail, rubber vacuum lines perish. An old car is simple only if someone has kept its simple parts in order. So the conclusion is not old good, new bad, it is know where your engine stores risk. On a modern small turbo petrol, you may focus on correct oil specification, service intervals, cooling, turbo health, and the particular fuel system. On a 1990s naturally aspirated Japanese petrol car, you may focus more on age-related rubber, cooling, timing components, ignition, corrosion, and records. Different risks, same discipline, and we have not reached the most revealing part yet. The real divide between the engines that become legends and the engines that become breakers' yard stories is not on the production line. It begins with what happens after the car is sold. The Japanese clue that is not inside the engine. There is a reason the phrase Japanese reliability is too small to explain the whole picture. In Japan, the roadworthiness system includes periodic inspections and maintenance obligations. It is not a magic longevity program, but it reinforces an important idea. A vehicle should remain in proper condition, not merely move until the next failure. In Great Britain, an MOT is required by the 3rd anniversary of registration and then annually. That test matters. It checks basic road safety and environmental standards. But an MOT is not a complete health certificate for your engine. A car can pass today with oil that is overdue, coolant that has never been renewed, a timing belt approaching its age limit, or a small oil consumption problem the tester will never see. This is the trap. Some drivers use the MOT pass as proof that nothing is wrong. Others use an old Japanese badge as proof that nothing can go wrong. Both are shortcuts and both can cost you. The owners who got astonishing mileages created their own inspection culture. They learned normal, oil and coolant level, temperature, startup sound, idle and exhaust smell. Once you know normal, an abnormal noise does not need a diagnosis from TikTok. It needs attention. That is the part a good independent mechanic will recognize immediately. The customer who says, "It has changed slightly since last month," often saves money. The customer who says it has been doing that for a year but it still drives is usually arriving with a bigger job. And now we can expose the most misleading part of the 500,000-mile story. The cars that get remembered are the survivors. Nobody makes a viral video about the neglected example that overheated at 92,000 miles, rusted beyond repair, or was scrapped after a gearbox failure. Survivorship is powerful, but it can distort the lesson. The cars that survived did not prove that every engine from Japan was immortal. They proved that a conservative engine, serviced intelligently and protected from small problems, can have an astonishing second and third life. That is encouraging. It is also a warning because the next reveal decides whether an old Japanese car is a smart buy or a very expensive nostalgia purchase. The final reveal: the engine did not reach 500,000 miles. Here is the secret nobody can sell you in a badge, an additive bottle, or a used car advert. Long-lived engines are not preserved by a single heroic component. They are preserved by dozens of uneventful decisions. The owner checks the level before the warning light. They use the specified oil rather than whatever is cheapest that day. They replace the tired thermostat before it becomes an overheating event. They renew a timing belt, tensioner and water pump as a planned job, where that engine requires it, rather than gambling on one more year. They do not ignore a rough cold start because it clears after 30 seconds. They let the engine warm up through gentle driving instead of idling it for ages, then immediately demand full power. They fix the leak before it empties something important. That is what 500,000-mile engineering looks like in real life. It is not glamorous, it is repetitive, and it works because it preserves the margin we started with. This is why some 1990s Japanese engines can still feel magnificent today. They were often built around a relatively simple, conservative job. When owners matched that with disciplined upkeep, the engine's wear stayed gradual rather than catastrophic. The legend grew from a real pattern, but the pattern was never automatic. So should you buy one? Buy an old Japanese car because the individual car proves it has been cared for, not because the internet says its engine is immortal. A Honda, Toyota, Mazda, Nissan or Mitsubishi from that era can be a deeply satisfying, sensible machine. But at this age, corrosion can be more important than compression. A perfect engine in a rusty shell is not a bargain. A cheap car with no timing history is not cheap. A low-mileage car with old tires, stale fluids and a silent service file may be a worse purchase than a higher-mileage example maintained by one careful owner. Before you hand over money, ask for the records that protect the big risks. Confirm the timing system, belt or chain when it was last done, and what else was replaced with it. Check the cold start, not just a warmed-up engine prepared for your arrival. Watch the temperature on a proper drive. Look underneath for corrosion and leaks. Inspect coolant condition and level only when the engine is cold. Check the MOT history for repeated advisories, but remember it cannot reveal every mechanical concern. If the price matters to you, a pre-purchase inspection from a garage that knows older Japanese cars can be the cheapest decision of the whole purchase. And if you already own a modern car, do not take this as an invitation to look backwards with regret. Take the useful part forward. Your modern engine may have different technology and different weak points, but it still rewards oil at the correct specification, sensible intervals, warm up through gentle driving, early attention to cooling issues, and records that prove what was done. The old Japanese cars did not teach us that modern engines are doomed. They taught us something harder and more valuable. Reliability is a system. Engineering gives you a starting margin. Maintenance either protects it or spends it. Ownership decides which story your engine gets to tell. So the next time someone says, they do not build them like they used to, do not just nod. Ask what the car was asked to do, how it was maintained, what has already been renewed, and which small warning signs were ignored. That is how you stop buying a legend and start buying evidence. Tell us in the comments, what is the highest mileage car you have owned, which engine was in it, and what did you have to repair to keep it alive? Did an old Japanese engine earn its reputation in your driveway, or did your experience prove the badge alone means nothing? Subscribe if you want the facts behind the reputation, the hidden costs behind used car bargains, and practical ways to avoid the expensive mistakes nobody mentions in the advert.